Hello, ladies and gentlemen. In 10 seconds, I'm going to call the meeting to order. People who are sitting here in the room, hello, hello, hello. Very good. Welcome to the Cultural Center Feasibility Task Force meeting for Wednesday, December the 13th, 2023. I'm going to like to call the meeting to order. And first thing on our agenda is the adoption of the agenda. I hope everybody's had a chance to look through. Are there any changes, additions to the agenda before we ask for approval? Seeing none, can somebody please put that on the table? Thank you, Councillor Richardson. Seems kind of strange just saying that, but there you go. And may I have a seconder, please? Councillor Smeaton. And all in favor of carrying that? Thank you very much. That passes. Item number 3, declaration of pecuniary interest. Putting it out there, is there any declarations? And looking around, seeing none. Thank you very much. Adoption of the minutes from our last meeting on October the 25th. Hopefully everybody's had a chance to look through the meeting minutes. And if everybody's okay with that, and there's no discussion, would somebody please put that on the table for approval? Lori Dillon Schock is on the table. And may I have a second? Tim Weisner seconds that. All those in favor? Hands up, there we go, and that carries. Thank you very much. I see on our agenda there are no deputations or correspondence. Thank you very much. That brings us to new business, item 7.1, Municipal Land Acquisition and Procurement Process Presentation by our very own City of Kawartha Lakes CAO, Ron Taylor. And we'll turn it over to you, sir. Good timing, sir. Thank you very much and welcome.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the introduction and happy to attend today's meeting. And good to meet all of you, either virtually, I'm pointing behind me because that's where the screens are. And I appreciate there's a number of people online, so rather than presenting sort of from the side, I figure you're at least getting a better sort of glimpse into what we're doing here at the Chamber. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for the invitation. The agenda item is specific to land acquisition and procurement processes, and I'm flattered that it's a presentation. I'm coming to this meeting sort of just open to any conversation, any discussion, any questions that you might have about our municipal processes, and whether that's today or in the future as you're continuing to do your important work. I might just frame a little bit based on what my understanding is today, if that's okay. And certainly one big part of this work that you're doing is looking at the end product. What is going to be built? Where is it going to be built? And how is it going to operate when that comes to fruition in the future? And certainly the city has a number of prescribed roles, responsibilities, and quite frankly, processes that we need to follow as we're managing or considering public assets. And they're obviously funded through a number of ways, but partially at least through public funds. And so we want to make sure that we're following those processes. And so if I could, Chair, I'd like to start I want to go back to your task force terms of reference, because I think it's important that we always have that sort of understanding of what we're collectively working on. Certainly you'll be well aware of it. The first item is to look at the results of the last phase of the study, inform further site exploration, selection, and feasibility analysis. Review refined operating, resource, and capital cost estimates that came out of the Phase 1 reports. So I presume those are all well in hand. Inform a fundraising and financing strategy. And that's kind of where I would say number 4 and the next one are really where I'm coming in today, but as a broader conversation with the city's role. So obviously there's a financing strategy overall, whether it's for the capital construction and or the operating down the line. So we want to be well in tune with where you're going with your work. The fifth one, though, and I think the most applicable, is to receive and assess recommendations for the preferred operating model and site location for the Cultural Centre of Kawartha Lakes. So again, I'll walk you through very quickly sort of the different sort of processes, and then happy to kind of pause there, and if there's a scoping that you would prefer, and I can answer questions. So essentially, the way I see it is this project right now is concept. So it's in our asset management plan. It's in our sort of longer range planning. And we do have a provision in our long-term financial plan for some funding associated with this. But again, I almost call it a placeholder, because then we need to do the work and sort of define what it was at concept to where we're actually going. And even in your work, you're going to be recommending and developing that fundraising, the financing strategy. We're going to know much better. It's not concept anymore. Now there's a thing that's there that we can start to put some hard costs to and understanding. And then iteratively, we would then integrate that into our asset management plans and our financial plans going forward. So that's kind of the first phase. So there's already good sort of work and understanding there and foundation. There's always touch points, because it is a public asset at the end of the day, that we're going to come to council. Either it's going to be, we're now going to approve a concept, and now here's the structure. We're going to obviously have touch points with the decision makers as we need to. And this process is a little bit unique in the sense that because of the size and scale of this particular asset, and it's not currently sort of embedded in our sort of core operations. So we lean on experts like yourselves, task forces, to help inform that decision-making tree sort of down the line. Once we get to that stage, and once you get to that stage of recommendations, council's going to make a decision. They're going to decide that this is sort of the model, that we're going to pursue this asset, and we're going to then integrate that into our detailed plans. And so with that, there's processes. We have a very explicit process for acquiring or disposing of public land. And it's very prescribed, and there's a number of steps and processes because it's a public asset. And then similarly, when we are planning for construction, whether it's a partnership or it's led directly by the city or some variation thereof, it still has to conform to our procurement processes. So how a capital project, how we acquire sort of resources, trades, et cetera, to build. So there's a number of processes that are there and very clear. And then at the end of the day, once it's built, it needs to be operated down the line, and we have additional sort of processes in place for procurement or putting resources towards that. So, Chair, that's kind of really a real quick, sweeping sort of touch point on our overall municipal processes. I'm understanding that what's really top of mind to you is site acquisition or site location, and how do we mobilize to secure that. So I'm certainly happy to answer any questions that you have related to that. And if it's not today, certainly can follow up with you on the actual prescribed processes, because they're very clear. They're prescribed provincially. So we're not unique or different in our overall approach to how we acquire lands. So maybe I'll pause there. That was a lot. And certainly if there's any questions or you want to steer me in a particular sort of theme, happy to answer.
So put it out there, folks around the table. Do you have specific questions related to what we've already heard there? Because I know this is a thing that's obviously very important for the work that we're about to do, and you know, how we fit in this whole process. is an important piece for us. So just wondering if we have specific questions. Mr. Murphy.
Yeah, I got to remember the process. I'm aware that over the last many years, on occasion, council has allocated funds to be set aside in the long-term budget allocated for a future cultural center. Could you maybe talk to that, and how much money is set aside, and what is it earmarked for, and how do we get from today to spending that money?
Thanks for that. Good question. So in terms of, again, also the continuum that I kind of described, right? Concept to reality to operating, I would suggest that the cultural center was a concept that was included in our longer term planning. So you're spot on. We did make a provision. We have a 10-year long-term financial plan that sort of spells out and looks at what assets we are envisioning we need to budget for over that 10-year period. We did that exercise, actually for this particular concept, we're probably 4 to 5 years past already, where there was a provision put in to our asset plans for that future cultural center. We didn't know the dates or the timing, but thought it was good to start. If I'm mistaken, and I'll follow up to make sure, but I believe we had put $6 million as kind of just an estimate at the time. That might be a municipal share to contribute to a cultural center. It obviously was done without any sort of details, and quite frankly, that's why Task Force past and now current are tasked with fine-tuning what that model will look like. And I know in the previous report, there was broad-based estimates for that project. So hopefully that answers the first part. But what we really do is then sort of say, okay, well, concept accepted, council's sort of buying into it. Obviously, we need more details. So at the time, we said, let's put it in the latter part of our plan. It's not going to happen, again, 5 years ago. It wasn't going to happen that year, next year, or the year after. But we thought it was suitable to capture that project in our 10-year planning. So it is still there. I would suggest that once your work is completed and we get some further direction from council, that we'll take that and adjust our long-term financial plan and our asset plan. So we'll actually update the cost estimates. We'll look at sort of what is the now feasibility of timing, and then we'll start to mobilize accordingly. So it's, I mean, again, to maybe the other side of it, we didn't say, okay, we're going to take $6 million 5 years ago, and now it's sitting in a reserve somewhere. This is in our overall sort of annual financial planning, that it will be a future expenditure, what we thought was in that latter part of the capital plan. So I don't know if, does that help with the...
Yes, that's my understanding of the way things are. So I would assume that when our recommendations come to our current council, that it makes things a little smoother moving forward, and that previous councils have already allocated funds in the budget for this. So we don't have to go back to square one with our current council to get them on board. We've already addressed that, and we have started putting funds aside for the future cultural center. So at this point, it's a matter of determining the site and then accessing those funds that are already there. Is that correct?
Yeah, that would be a good synopsis. Again, the only caveat I'll say is, once we know the order of magnitude, so we know it's not likely going to be a $6 million project. So again, we'll have to go back and see what the proportionate share of the municipality is. That will be reflected in the budget, as will the overall budget. And then we'll time it sort of where it makes sense from the collective recommendations when it will be from feasibility to reality. And then we would budget it accordingly overall based on those different funding sources. Yep.
That's okay, Pat? Lori?
There is an archive today. Should we be aware of any financing to maintain that archive that would contribute to the future of this project? Is there something we should be aware of there?
So through the chair, I don't think so is the easy answer. We are quite aware, I think, of this work here and where we're heading. So knowing the dynamics of that future building, I would suggest that we would not be making large, significant investments in any of the sort of overlapping functions until council makes that sort of future decision. So sure, we will make modest investments. Even our spaces, we're probably still going to need them, even outside of where we're heading with this sort of consolidated cultural center. So I don't think there's funds on the table that we would be putting in one stream that should be another. I think we're just going to incrementally, slow and steady, continue on with our current municipal services. And then when it's appropriate, we probably will expand that investment into this new facility once we know better.
Thank you very much. And if I may just follow up on Pat's question. So just to confirm, over that 10-year sort of plan, commitment, long-term plan, you say we're about 4 or 5 years along that track. So each year in the annual budget, there is a specific amount of funds dedicated, set aside towards this, aiming at a $6 million kind of fund? Or am I getting that wrong? Because if I'm getting that wrong, I want to make sure that it's clarified for me and everybody.
Nope, great clarification. So when we do our 10-year financial plan, what we're essentially doing is saying we're forecasting over the next 10 years that we're going to spend X amount of dollars approximately on our capital needs. And so we cost it out. And then the plan suggests, well, there's some that can be done in that sort of front end, there's some middle and end, but we don't collect on every project year over year, but we build it into our overall planning. So again, I would suggest that we want to revisit when we update the plan next year, and we are going to do that we do sort of a 5-year update on all the projects anyways. So we'll have a better number, I would suggest, number one. And number two, we wouldn't budget until we get to that budget year, and council will approve it in that respective capital budget in the year. But I mean, to give you an order of magnitude, I mean, our 10-year financial plan is essentially, like, you're talking about expenditure approaching $1 billion that's all mapped out over 10 years. And it's essentially then saying our capital program will spend about $100 million, throwing out some numbers, but essentially every year, that would be the capital program. And then these projects there's a value put towards them, and they're slotted in that annual expenditure. So I don't know if that helps a little bit better.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. I just wanted to be sure that I was getting it right.
I probably should have just clarified, though. Honestly, though, I think the big thing is that it's in the plan. When I'm talking about concept, I mean, there's pre-concept, right? People have been talking about this for decades. The fact that it was committed and in a plan, that's council's plan. So there's something there. It means that it's a legitimate concept, if you will, that we're working towards accomplishing. So glad that it got put in there 5 years ago, and glad that the work and it's reflective in these different task force sort of responsibilities. I would suggest in the next 5, it's going to be really much more reality, if you will. But we're certainly mobilizing and doing what we can, and looking forward to where you take it and sort of what it's going to look like and feel like at the end of the day.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Before I let you go, though, if I can just ask you one question, what is the best thing, the most useful thing to you that we as a task force can do to help this along?
It's a great question. I was going to say first, before you asked, I was going to say thanks for letting me off easy today, and it was nice to see everybody. But honestly, I think, and I'm not speaking for me individually, I'll just maybe speak for the city or for council in this case. I do think it's like your work is important. It's going to reflect, or your recommendations that you make are going to move this from early concept to reality. And I really think the most helpful thing is you stay focused on what the mandate is that we read through. So if council had a fundraising and financing strategy that came from you and had sort of, this is what you as a community feel we need, and here's the site dynamics, right? In terms of location. We don't even need to get to the granular level of a specific one property, but understanding sort of the overall best case, I think will go miles. And I go back to my comment. I think it's important work. May not feel like it always, but it really is a truly informing piece to move this project through to the next step.
Now the questions are going to start coming.
Okay, Tim.
Are there other goals in mind that are goals of the city that we should be keeping in mind? The first one that jumps to my mind is any sort of economic revitalization of a area or of a district that something like a cultural center could be a part of and could play into.
Through the chair, I mean, certainly, best case, we would want to hear what your collective recommendations are for that, number one. Number two, I would suggest you're probably in great hands where you've got staff that are here regularly that can expose those sort of bigger municipal objectives, if you will. From what I'm understanding in your conversations up to this point, or what I've heard, I think you're well advanced. I think you understand as a group the importance of a cultural center on the bigger sort of economy and its impact. So I was expecting that those would come through. Certainly keeping aligned. You're going to be talking about, I think on your agenda later today, our strategic plan. I mean, these are council's priorities sort of moving through. And I think those are good markers for you as well to consider, where we're trying to build an economy, where we're trying to balance sort of different community goals and objectives. Those are probably best to guide you in how you could align this on some of our efforts municipally.
Pat.
You talked of timeline in a rather abstract that, we've got this concept that we're moving forward with, and we're 5 years into a 10-year plan. I'm hoping it's not going to be another 5 years before we see shovels in the ground. But the question would be on timelines. The task force has a finite time that we will be sitting. I'm hoping that we will well advance the time frame to identifying properties and having assessment done by our architectural team and have recommendations coming to council well in advance of the time that we're allotted. That would be my hope. So when we come to council and we have a recommendation, we say we found a piece of property we think is going to be suitable, and council says yes, all of the municipal guidelines to get from that point to actually putting money on the table, purchasing a property, how do you see that timeline happening in following your municipal rules that you have to operate under?
Sure, thank you for that. Again, it'll be sort of stepped in the process. So, again, if council approves the concept, let's use your example. Let's say we knew even of a site. That would be, in my mind, the next immediate process. Right now, it's not in any budget. So it's a good question. So I'm expecting if your work was completed next year, the earliest that we could budget and then assign acquisition of land would be 2025. Now, again, if we needed to get creative and do certain things, the process does allow for that, but we do, there's a prescribed process to acquire land. It's much different than disposition, though, I will add, so it has some flexibility in the process. It's more council directed, as you can appreciate. I mean, we want to acquire lands for the best possible price, and so we're going to do it based on appraisals, but also opportunity, right? We're not going to be held to paying a premium because we're chasing one site potentially either. So the processes are built to sort of protect the public overall in terms of pursuit of those lands. But you're asking about timelines. I would suggest that we could be in budgets and pursuing as early as 2025.
So my understanding then, you're saying that the money that's hypothetically the $6 million that's set aside in the long-term budget needs to be taken out of that long-term budget and put into the current budget at such time as you're doing the yearly budget. Is that correct?
Yep, that's a good way to characterize it. And a council would need to approve its acceleration if it was in a future year in the plan. So yes, we would want to at least embed, potentially you could also do it in steps, right? This is a big capital project at the end of the day. So we're not going to all of a sudden in 2025 say, hey, council, you need to budget tens of millions of dollars to fund this. But we can do it in steps. If we needed to acquire land, we could then draw upon that future planning, insert it in a budget, acquire lands in 2025. You're also doing a financing strategy and a fundraising strategy for this. So we would know better what's the overall sort of dynamics. Is there a timeline for that as well? In terms of fundraising to then build. So all of that would be built into our sort of subsequent years, but we don't have to do a single budget in 25. We can stage it or phase it as it best works for the project.
So understanding the way that the real estate market works, if there was a property that was identified today, I'm not sure we're going to have individual property owners that have their property currently on the market going to sit around and wait until 2025 for the city to put their money on the table in a written offer to purchase. So are there mechanisms that can be used to come into an agreement with a landowner to act in good faith that they're going to hold the property while it's being assessed and goes through the budgetary process and whatnot? I understand that it's there to protect the public in the step-by-step rules, and I'm not suggesting that anything vary from that. I just looking at it being very difficult to identify a property, open a discussion with a property owner, and say, well, we want to go through this process, and maybe in 2 years you're going to see some money. In the real estate world, that's not the way things work. In the municipal world, I guess it is, but it puts us in a very difficult position to actually get our architectural firm to be looking at a property and doing an assessment and doing the necessary studies. That's a lot to ask of a vendor of a piece of property to wait for.
Yeah, no, I certainly do appreciate sort of the market and the dynamics, and again, the constraints, if you will, or the processes for the land acquisition on the municipal side are very deliberate. And I do appreciate what you're saying. I would suggest that today we wouldn't be equipped and ready to enter into anything like that. Because quite frankly, we don't even have, and again, I'm speaking more, council doesn't have the information to make, is that property that you might be talking about even suitable? We don't have that level of recommendation yet. Don't know even sort of where in the city generally this thing might be located. So in my mind, there still is unfinished work that would need to inform that decision. If council got to a point where there was a site or a very focused area of a couple of sites, sure, then that kicks a new process in. I guess I would just caution on the other side, if we were starting to have conversations with landowners, I mean, we can't control the market. I would be concerned as sort of a public body that we're almost going to be held to ransom potentially for one single landowner, that we're kind of saying, hey, we're all in, we need to locate on your property. May not be the case, and I just don't know how we overcome that. So I really believe, at least in our world, we need to be methodical, slow and steady. We start with concept, we get to, here's the sort of ideal site locations, or even location. It should not be public knowledge. And we should be going through that next acquisition process when council's ready and funds it.
Okay, Pat, we are going to have to move this along because we're final question.
Okay, so we have contracted our study professionals to help us to identify a piece of property. And that's a substantial amount of money in that contract. If in the next 12 months, we can't really enter into any agreement with anybody to actually look at doing an in-depth study of their property, it seems to me that we're just going to be repeating that over and over and over again, because we'll look at a piece of property and then somebody else will buy it, and we'll have to look at another piece of property and somebody else will buy it. I don't understand how we can get from where we are today and actually have a in-depth look at the piece of property and its feasibility without entering some kind of an agreement with a property owner that they are going to agree to allow us and do that study. So
I'll just conclude, Chair. I guess I'll start by saying I'm happy to follow up either individually or with the group. Sort of, if you had some questions that you wanted to put through, happy to sort of get into the details and follow up with you. Again, I appreciate sort of it, because we are a public body overall, you know, we are accountable collectively to the public. There are processes. There's ways to do things, though. I mean, if we had recommendations that from this group and council said, hey, let's start to pursue a site or sites, we can certainly shortlist. We can do open processes where property owners can bid or at least sort of express interest, and we can do a secondary sort of screening. But I would discourage going all in on a single property at the moment. And especially in this case right now, I wouldn't, just personally, I'm not sure what is being proposed. If it's a new build, you're looking for a vacant property, are you looking to refresh a building that's on Main Street or somewhere else? Like, we're still sort of in that concept stage. And so, again, I would just put it out there. There's still a lot of complexities or maybe questions that we should answer. But I don't want you to leave that there's this bureaucratic, prescribed, long-term process either. I think there's somewhere in the middle, but I think we have to do it methodically and sort of incrementally.
Thank you. I think based on everything that you've told us today too, and knowing what our mandate is for this task force, we have some very specific work to do before we get to the point where we can address some of those things. Am I right? You know, I mean, knowing what our model is and all of the specific bits and pieces that go with it will have a big impact on a kind of site, you know, that would be potentially useful. So.
Yeah, I would agree. And again, and I appreciate the comments. So it's kind of like a chicken and the egg thing, right? You want to design it a little further. There's opportunity. You want to grab it. So again, I want you to be comfortable that there is some flexibility in the overall processes. But I think, again, we really do need to get to a point where we know what we're trying to acquire fundamentally, and then we can manage it sort of through a process and in fairly short order too. I don't think this is concept 10 years plus down the line anymore. And again, I think the work's important here. So I thank you for the time, Chair, I do. And again, happy to follow up at the tail end or any other time. If you have a set of questions, you can channel them through Donna. Happy to answer, or I can attend a future meeting and answer some of them.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you giving us your time. That's very helpful to us, so thank you.
Thanks for having me, and happy holidays to everybody.
Thank you.
Good to see all of you. Good to see some of you online, and hopefully I catch up in person in the new year. Thanks.
Take care. Thank you. And so if I may ask the people around the table, if somebody would like to make the motion that the presentation from Mr. Taylor, CAO, City of Kawartha Lakes, regarding municipal land acquisition and procurement be received. There it is. Mr. Weisner has his hand up, and it is seconded by Mr. Murphy. Thank you very much. Oh, all in favor? There we go. Thank you very much. That's carried. And that's, pardon me, brings us to 7.2 in the agenda, research and engagement plan. And we do have guests. Thank you for your patience, folks. It's great to have you along with us today. We appreciate you taking the time to be here. Stephanie Ma from Jamo Architecture and Peter Lyman from Nordic City Consulting. Is it okay if I just turn it over to you folks and you take it away? All right. Thank you very much. Welcome.
Thank you. And thank you for that discussion. It was very helpful for all of us to hear. Okay, I am going to share my screen. And if you can let me know if and when you see it.
We see it.
I can see it.
See that? Okay, excellent. And let me just figure out where my Zoom went. Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So for this presentation, we'll be going over the research plan and site selection criteria review. So that second part really ties into that great discussion that everyone just had. And it'll be a mix of, we'll present some content for you, but then also we want to have a lot of discussion feedback. I think in total we have allocated 45 minutes to an hour. I hope that's okay, but Chair, please let us know if we need to shorten that, since I know we started a bit behind. So the format here will be Natalia and Peter from Nordisti will be presenting the research plan. They'll talk for about 5 to 10 minutes, and then they have some questions for us to talk through. And hopefully you were able to look at the slides in advance as well. I think they were shared through the agenda, but they're the same here. And then Mitchell from JIMO will present the site selection criteria review. It's essentially a section that shows what we're looking at for site selection. And then again, an opportunity for comments, discussion, feedback. And the goal of this is that at the end of it, the consultant team can have direction from the task force to ensure that we're good to go with moving ahead with this research plan and site selection process. So I will go to the next slide here. Great, and off to Natalia.
Thanks, Stephanie. And hello, everyone. It was so nice to connect with many of you last week at the Queen Elizabeth Center in Oakville and the Gibson Center in Alliston. Thanks again to Donna for organizing. Each facility provided some interesting insights for us to consider in our research. And yes, as Stephanie mentioned, today we're going to be giving you an overview of our research plans. So just as a reminder, and we even kind of touched on your terms of reference that are very similar to our goals in our project, but our collective goals for this project include reviewing and socializing the results of the Phase 1 feasibility report in order to receive feedback on it and narrow in on the options that we provided. JIMO will undertake further site exploration to determine viable locations for the facility. Nordicity will help identify a fundraising and financing strategy for the facility, as well as explore appropriate governance and operating models. And JIMO will be updating capital cost estimates based on 2023-2024 conditions. So next slide, please. Yeah, so in that context, our collective research objective is to narrow in on the size, scope, and site of Kawartha Lake's new cultural and archival facility. And note on Nordicity's side, we're testing out different ways to refer to the facility so that can most accurately reflect its role. And since archival, exhibition, and education spaces came out as a key priority in phase 1 research, we started referring to it as that specifically in this presentation today. But we'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this as the research moves forward and we get a little bit closer to the size and scope decision. But specifically, Nordicity will work on the size and scope research. And so to do this, our research plans include undertaking secondary research and a market scan to validate the trends and the opportunities that were identified in phase 1. So this will include a comparative analysis of similar facilities in and around Ontario, likely including the ones that were on our tour last week. We'll also be engaging with a wide variety of stakeholders, building on the consultations from phase 1, of course, to dig into different elements of the research. So we plan to chat with city staff from relevant departments who might be tasked with moving this project forward now or in the future, subject matter experts in cultural facility development and operations. So that might include the executive directors of comparable cultural facilities and folks like yourself. So we'll certainly be taking the opportunity in each of our regularly scheduled meetings with you folks to pick your brain on the topics of research that we're undertaking at the time. We'll also be checking in with local arts, culture, and heritage leaders who previously identified having a need for the spaces the new facility would offer, and potentially explore connecting with representatives from complementary sectors like tourism and post-secondary education to potentially see if there are other market opportunities in these areas. Next slide, please. And so we've developed research questions across 5 key themes that are displayed on this slide here, some of which we'd like to ask you today to kick off our research some more. So I'm just going to give you an overview of all of the themes up first, and then I'm going to turn it to Peter to facilitate the discussion. So our main themes include needs validation. So we're hoping to confirm the necessary size, features, and amenities of the space to ensure that it meets current and future projected needs. If you remember in phase 1 and on the next slide, we included both the medium and large size options, which included different facility elements prioritized based on need and what was heard in phase 1. So we're just hoping that today we can maybe look at that and see, does this still reflect which size might be the best fit? As well, we'll be looking at demand and usage, so understanding the types of rental users and audiences that the facility would attract in what times of year and at what price points. So once we're clear on all that, we'll be able to dig deeper into governance models, identifying what does or doesn't work in terms of governance at comparable facilities, and narrowing in on an appropriate framework for Kawartha Lakes, looking at the operations, of course, exploring appropriate staffing structures, programming, and business models, and finally, fundraising, exploring funding sources and precedents for this development project. So this morning's discussions were helpful for some of that as well. But yeah, I'll pass it to Peter. And just given time, we want to hear all of your thoughts on these questions, and we're happy to receive further responses after this meeting as well. But we're hoping that we can get at least 2 folks to respond to each question today, and then we'll move on to each just to keep things flowing so we can move into Jaimo's bits as well. But I'll pass it to Peter for that.
Thanks, Natalia. I think if you take down the screen and maybe put that the research themes in the chat, although not sure everybody has access to the chat, but one thing that's very hard to facilitate when you can't see anybody, but maybe we would like to we could go in order. What is the size that in your just overview comment that you would think would be most fitting? Now, what Natalia's just put up on this in the screen is the size and scope options from phase 1. So, on one hand, it was 25,000 to 45,000 square feet. The other was 37 to 65,000 square feet, and with mainly and this is again end of phase 1. There can be some variation to both, of course, in terms of the must-have spaces and the should-have and the could-haves. So there's a lot of flexibility still in that. So I don't know if it's just on the first, if anybody wants to start off the comment about what their feel for right now is that we should be cautious and have a facility that is that square footage, and we can relate it to some of the for those of you who went on the tour, to some of the options that at least we know about that you saw in terms of size. So anybody want to kick that off?
All right.
I actually just check quickly in the council chambers. If I stop sharing screen, is that okay? Or is it really helpful to see the questions on the side? I know Natalia just put the questions in chat, but I'm not sure how, can you see the Zoom chat, or can I take down the screen, or what's preferred?
I think, if I'm not mistaken, most of us have a printed copy of it, do we not? So we're probably okay if it's not on the screen, because we do have it in front of us.
Right.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks for checking with that, Stephanie.
Yeah, so is there anybody around the table who would like to sort of kick things off? Councillor Richardson.
Thank you, and through you, and thank you, group. Can I just ask our staff right now, what is our current archive space, square footage? You can have if you want to just look, I can keep going ahead here. Oh, is it not working?
Oh, sorry. Oh, there it is. I'm not sure of the exact dimensions. I know when we're referring strictly to the archival space, it is very, very limited. We have a small cage that is within the record center, which is primarily for those municipal records that we've gathered from the predecessor municipality. So I would say our actual storage space for the archive is probably, I'm going to be generous and say 300 square feet, but it's probably less than that.
Great, that's
Well, in other words, compared to a facility that we're talking about, it's just a small storage space.
Exactly. The main function of the building that we're in right now is strictly for records management purposes. There is no archival component such as it is to be able to facilitate a fully fleshed out archival program.
Yeah, no, thank you. And when you're looking at the numbers, when you look at medium and large scale, and what we got to view last week in Simcoe, you're looking for that context, right? That's why I want to go for a tour with this group there. Another point that I felt that really fleshed out is when we were moving through those models, how important sustainability is and feasibility is, and looking at some of the space where other departments were more revenue generated than other departments, right? So for me, you want to find that balance, right? You want to be able to have the proper space for, your working groups, your, renting spaces. But the one interesting one that I found that stood out for me in Oakville was the fact that their culinary and their rehearsal space, how much money that combination made for that facility. And to me, those are just things, moving forward that, we not saying that we're going to be sustainable from the word go, but if we can build a model where we have seen other models actually generating that type of revenue, to me, that's something that we need to look heavily into.
Thank you.
One answer to that is that we did the operating models, the two versions, in the first phase. And as Donna, I think, has pointed out before, it was pleasing to see that the larger facility, in fact, had a lower operating deficit. And I would quickly say that it is, but it is obviously higher risk because you're assuming a certain level of traffic. And that's one thing that we would have to, make a little bit more clear. for council, for the task force, as to whether, what the risk is in terms of the two versions or any other versions.
And thank you for mentioning the risk, because I think that's something that we do have to take into consideration moving forward as well, because, we have a population threshold, and we also have a very high summer threshold that does come through this area as well, but we are growing. So all those different factors have to be taken into consideration as we move through this model as well.
Councillor Smith?
Yes. Go ahead. I don't need to answer that one, I don't think.
Thank you. Councillor Smeaton, did you have a question? Or?
Just a brief tag on. Thank you through your chair to Councillor Richardson. It's going to take me a while. Crystal balling, like you just said, in terms of numbers, I think we also have to look at the possibilities. This isn't my opinion, but the possibilities of library archives and police archives also being possible additions to the archives. That hasn't been brought to council. That's not an opinion, but I'm always looking at periphery. Where else do we have archives? I'd be very surprised if those organizations and groups aren't going to come forward and say, hey, this building is happening. This is an archival opportunity. That'll be a decision that comes down the road, but I'm just curious if that moves us from small to medium or probably keeps us still in small, right?
I'm just sharing the Simcoe document from last week, and those are included in those archives. So no, it's smart. It's a good point to explore.
Laurie?
I'd like to build on that. One observation I made from visiting the Simcoe County Archive is how many times they expanded their facility every 3 to 4 years. So as part of this evaluation, I hope you're also looking at the space and the land, not just the building, so that there's some flexibility if you need a larger archive. I hope that's part of your study.
Very good point. Stephanie, do you have any comment?
No, that's a good comment. Thank you. And we'll get into site selection criteria, but we could certainly add that as like a line item on the space evaluation to include room for expansion.
Do we have more information about our archives?
I just wanted to clarify one thing. The size of an archive is not actually dependent necessarily on the size of the municipality for which it serves. And I think one thing to consider is that this archive also deals with the predecessor municipality, that is 16 predecessor municipalities, and the county. So it is actually the fact that we are a smaller municipality and does not actually mean that the archive for it would be small as well.
Pat? Not wanting to talk specifically about archives, but in a needs assessment that was done by the Kawartha Lakes Arts Council some 6-7 years ago, contacting all of the major players in the cultural sector. Across the board, one thing that was identified was a need for curation and proper storage of collections. So we're kind of two conversations here. The municipal archive, which is somewhat separate from the discussion of archival space for the cultural sector. In both cases, I think that the need is maybe underestimated on our square footage that we have identified in either the medium or the large size. Second to that, yes, our tour was very helpful, and I came away feeling that the 112,000 square foot Oakville Center that we visited was much more aligned with the vision of what we would have in Kawartha Lakes. I continue to get feedback from the Kawartha Lakes Arts Council and the general public, I would say, knowing that there is a task force sitting currently, is growing. So our feasibility study was done during COVID, which it was remarkable that we did get it done. Thank you for the efforts that went into making that happen. I think our list of users, our list of partners, tenants, collaborations continues to grow, even since this paper was put together 2 years ago. So I would say we're looking at the large-scale cultural model, and we might have to even flush out on that model.
That gets into the second, sorry.
Sorry, just before we go there,
Christine.
Peter, I see Christina has her hand up. And I'm sorry, Christina, I didn't know how long you've had your hand up because I just saw it now. But you have the floor.
I haven't had it up very long. I just kind of building on what Pat has said, talking about the Oakville location. It was, I felt, a bit hollow, and granted, we weren't there at a time when it was being activated at its prime, I'm sure. But I think that it's, important that we are really looking at space. I always joke with my own personal house, I don't necessarily need a bigger house. I just need a better designed house. So is there an opportunity that we can be putting some of those lists on, the must-haves, the should-haves? Can we be combining them together? I know there's already been mentioned, and the ceremonial space could be combined, but is there some other options there where it could really maximize the use? But that being said, as well, as we saw during COVID, prices continue to go up with building. I am a believer in building bigger so that we're not going to have to continue to add on every couple of years the way that they have in Simcoe. I also just wanted to mention, with respect to governance, the governance question, as someone who works for a funder that would limit the municipal ability to apply for funding, I only know one small aspect of that. I was wondering if there's an opportunity for us to get some sort of pro and con list about the different types of governance that we could look at, and what sort of factors could play into to help us inform that decision in terms of governance.
The answer to that question is very simple. Is yes, we're looking at all kinds but I think giving you the option of seeing, well, there's this way it can operate, and this is what it entails and enables. As with everything, there are, you could, the more you put it in the hands of the community, maybe the more funds you could raise in that way, but you also lose a bit of control over what's happening there. So there's that kind of trade-off. That's just a general answer. With respect to design, though, one of the things that seemed to, I didn't go on the tour because I wasn't in the city or in the region, would like to be there, but I read the notes on it, and flexibility and multi-use and continuous, pruning of certain activities and taking on others, being very, very responsive to the community seems to be very good watchwords for the design process. Now, I think that would be incorporated, which would make it, even when we say must have, should haves, and so on, that's an opening statement, really. You have to design it so there can be those kinds of changes and repurposing. And you've got some great our colleagues from JIMO are very good at that. So, that's going to be very much a feature of it, not marooning certain spaces into recording studios or something like that, which maybe seemed a good idea at the time, but after 2 or 3 years, you find it's not really useful anymore. So,
I guess.
Any other questions, or do we move on to any other?
I think we can move on, I think.
Well, I think
now I see a question.
In terms of,
I'm sorry, Peter. We do have one. Lori?
Sorry, I misunderstood. Are we still going through our research themes? Yeah? Are you asking to move on to
Yes.
the next research theme?
I was going to make that clear. I was going to move on, yes, to research theme. Sort of, we've had, this isn't something we have to adhere to directly, but we started talking about size, but of course we talked about a little bit about demand and usage, a little bit about governance models and operations and fundraising. So go ahead, pick your theme and give an opinion or ask a question.
Thank you, Peter. With respect to demand and usage, I did notice we have some, we have the Pinois Center that is coming to town. I hope you're familiar with it. We have a Lindsay Rec Center. We have an archive, which is less a priority. Will you be looking at the overlap of those, those other existing facilities at all?
We have to look at, we have to and have done some of that, obviously, in phase one, of what programs there are available, what facilities are available, and we will be looking for the gaps in them, of course, and also the potential for collaborations, because it's another lesson. Well, we know it from doing other projects as well, of course, but the key to sustainability is have the good community relations, but also for the particularly those in the community who have banded together for some reason, and you enter into collaborations and partnerships with them, so that the thing is to mix and match, so you utilize as much of the space as possible for as much of the time in good community works, serving people, the most largest percentage of people, or those with the most need, and so on. And you're constantly juggling that. That's the beauty of community centers.
May I ask a
Follow-up?
question of process? Will we be sharing our own observations of the tour? Is that later in the agenda? Yes? Okay, thank you.
Councillor Smeaton?
Just really quickly through you, Mr. Chair, follow up. I'm glad that came up. I've been making a list of facilities that I'm aware of that have things that may be on that list, Pingway was one, Boys and Girls Club that has a recording studio already. I've sort of just in my own mind, just to help myself walk through this process. And as I go to Bob Cajun or Kin Mountain, I make my little list of where those things are too. And then I have a separate list that are some facility related items that are no longer available to the public. So because of one of our members of here, I found out the Quilting Guild is no longer using the Bob Cajun Library, for example. There's an art classes that due to a switch in programming aren't using our local library. Those kinds of things are my other list. So I'm wondering, should I be making those lists, or am I overstepping? Is that the consultant's role? I've just been doing it for my own personal, as I think and muse, because I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, it could easily come up a recording studio, and that's funny that he mentioned that. That was one that I thought of, and I was with Amy the other day, and I was thinking, well, that's something we have, and we should be promoting more of. It's already there. That wouldn't necessarily be square footage needed for the cultural center, in my mind, but that would be maybe others would disagree. Those kinds of things. So, is that a list that I keep going with and is helpful to someone, or is it something that I just ruminate on my own?
We'd love to have it.
Yeah, I would think that's the kind of thing that would be well worth sharing, because it sort of ties the community together. It's all part of the picture, I would think. Councillor Richardson.
Thank you,
Sorry,
through you.
Tim.
And just to go in on what Councillor Smeaton said as well, during that tour, thinking of the tools, anyways, the one conversation I did have was that their music facility is not being used to its optimum, because there is those other options in the community where folks can go. Point being is the Boys and Girls Club. And again, technology has changed, right? You can be a recording studio with your phone these days, right? So things are changing. And when we talk about determination, when we're close to partnerships, the one in Oakville, when they became close to feasibility is when they had that outreach. They grew by 700% when they had the schools using the facilities for some of their classes. So that's something I definitely think we need to tag as something as a working model as well.
Community networking, right? I'm going to let Eric follow up because it's connected with that, and then we're going to Tim. Eric? Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. The last piece to add to that is, I think it's the right time to just mention the enormous elephant in the room, I hope is obvious to everyone. And that is, as we're talking, I'm hearing building. I haven't heard anyone say buildings. And it's interesting when you're trying to narrow this down, there's so much stuff. Like in any big decision, there's always a lot. And I always say to myself, okay, but is there any simple decision I could make first to take some of that weight off? I know it can't be done today, but I also call it the elephant in the room because really the everything I'm hearing is this pre-described building. And if we could eliminate buildings and or decide on buildings, I think we'd start moving fast. I don't know if that's the proper order, but it's certainly where the weight's coming from, I think, in the periphery. I really do. So just an observation.
So your point is that if we are able to eliminate buildings and we sort of define a little bit more, and places, we define a little bit more what services programs would be most optimal in those facilities and in that region. Or did it just mean something else?
Just, yeah, I just that would clarify things for sure, I think, for everybody. Maybe you disagree, I don't know. You're the expert and I'm just ruminating.
All right, and Tim.
My question was vaguely along the same vein, which is, I think at some point there needs to be a discussion about whether an archive and a wood shop can live simpatico in a building. That's certainly not something that we saw in the places that we went and saw, and just whether those two things make good neighbors and can truly live under one roof when you have one group who is dusty and one group who needs to be in a hermetically sealed chamber. So, yeah.
That's a very good point, and certainly take that into consideration. I don't want to get into the comparison with the other facilities. That's later in the agenda, but there were some good points to draw from that as well, of how they thoroughly how they dealt with different uses even at the same time. In other words, you'd have to set up and take down, and there were processes around that, which maybe you wouldn't have an archive and then disassemble the archive and put it in a wood shop. But there are other things that you would consider if you want to have a gallery and then take down of studios to make, for dance rehearsals or whatever, that could be done. But there's some good operating practices to bring into bear there. So there's probably more flexibility than you might ordinarily think, and probably the economics will drive that as well. And people who would like to have permanent studios for themselves will have to live with the fact that no, there are certain times that you have to put them away and store stuff so that you can have other activities there, because no one is going to have a single purpose use, or not many are going to have single purpose uses for the whole time of their existence.
Lori.
Very similar to what you're saying. From a financial model, you've got an archive that won't generate revenue and will need ongoing, financing, and next to something that may have a bit more flexibility. So it just, an observation having visited Oakville and Simcoe County is they're almost polar opposites in terms of their financial model. And so I recognize that challenge. I relabeled your fundraising to really just financing, recognizing that the municipality will play a role in probably both sides of the coin here. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
I'm cognizant of time, so I'll call Norda City's part here. And we'd love if anybody has further thoughts on any of these questions, if you could follow up after the meeting. But I hope that's okay, Chair. I'm just going to throw it to Stephanie.
Thank you. That was a really great discussion and really helpful comments as we move forward. So I'm going to go back to sharing screen now, and we're going to get to the site selection criteria discussion. I know we just talked a little bit about site, so I think that'll be a good segue. Can you see my screen? Yes? Okay,
Yes,
great.
yes.
So Mitchell is going to present this quickly, and then we will again have some more discussion, less targeted questions and more just we're about to share a lot of information, and so we want to get your feedback on it before we move ahead with the actual process of looking into sites. So Mitchell, I'll pass it off to you.
Thanks, Stephanie, and thanks everyone for meeting today. It was really nice to meet all of you at the site visits, and we're hoping that this process ends with something as lively as some of those cultural hubs we saw. So this component of the project relates to the goal of further exploring site potentials, which we saw in the project objectives at the beginning. And following the first phase, which found that the municipally owned sites were not really suitable for a facility of this scale. The site selection criteria we're developing falls broadly into three categories: determining sizing and spatial requirements, determining the suitability of the location, and the determination of proximity to partnerships. So with the first kind of category of criteria development, which is determining sizing and spatial requirements, we have a number of determining factors. So as you heard earlier, likely one of the most important criteria is the selection of the size of the facility, which we've been talking about quite a bit today. That's to say the programmatic inclusions, which would be narrowed down from phase one, maybe things we saw in the site visits and kind of further inputs. But based on that selected size and program, we would continue on with precedent research, in which we look at comparable facilities in terms of both size and scope, in order to get an understanding of how each of these buildings work and what we can learn from them for the proposed facility. And so based on that size and scope, and the understanding developed from the precedent research, we would then develop a minimum approximate footprint. And I think there was a really great point made today that minimum approximate footprint also needs to account for flexibility in the future. So this would take into account, as examples, minimum interior ground-related programming, such as lobby programs that need direct exterior grade access, garbage collection, servicing, things like parking, among many other factors that might be determined once we've looked at these precedents. And so this would help us understand what sizes of site are simply not viable for this program and what size range we would need to be looking for. And keeping, of course, in mind that this facility may grow in the future. Moving on to the second category. This category is broadly meant to sift through additional built inventory that might allow for adaptive reuse, and also to narrow down a geographical area within Kawartha Lakes via availability of services and the like. So the plan would be to review municipal infrastructure and the ability to support new development. Specifically, is there water and sewer capacity for a building of this size? Is there available electrical capacity to support the program? We would also perform a visual review of the three kind of main street areas or cores of the three largest population centers, Lindsay, Bobcaygeon, and Fenelon Falls, as they'll have a greater likelihood of containing existing buildings of the scale of the proposed hub. That's not to rule anything else out, just it's a step. So we're further hoping to review the vacant commercial property tax rebate in conjunction with the above to determine if there are any large buildings that are currently vacant or underutilized. as the intention isn't to try to displace any already vibrant businesses. And we will also be reviewing development proposals with a commercial component to determine if there are opportunities in early stages of development for a kind of partnership or anything like that. Finally, consulting with local education organizations for potential partnerships or surplus sites, including Fleming College and the 4 school boards in the area, Trillium Lakelands, Peterborough, Victoria, Northumberland, Clarington Catholic District School Board. I'm going to not do very well on the French here, but Conseil Scolaire Vieux-Monde and Conseil Scolaire Catholique Mon Avenir. So as we saw in Oakville, a surplus site or a site planned to become surplus could really be a great opportunity for a reuse project. In the third category, it's mostly about adjacencies, so that we can understand where the hub is located in relation to other organizations that already exist and how it can enhance their current activities. And we propose to do this via a review of the Kawartha Lakes cultural map. We further propose to review the City of Kawartha Lakes cultural master plan and heritage master plans. And finally, following all of this, any shortlisted sites would be reviewed against municipal zoning bylaws.
Great. So I think that's kind of an overview of what our plan is for the site selection process. And before we start all of those steps, similarly with before Nordisty starts the research plan steps, we wanted to share them with you to get your comments, feedback, thought, to make sure does this make sense to you? Is there anything that we're missing? Do you just have thoughts that'll help guide us? Anything like that you are able to share would be much appreciated on that. I'm going to stop sharing screen for now, since I know that you have your slides in front of you, but you're welcome to ask specific questions about the items that we just shared, of course. So I'll open it up to questions now. Thank you.
Awesome. We'll start with Councillor Smeaton.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just a question for Manager Goodwin. Do things like our parking study and transit master plan that's in progress right now, active transportation plan, et cetera, things that would be pertinent, are they automatically sent to this consulting firm, or do they need to ask? Because that follows what she just said at the end there, and I was thinking the same thing. They'd want to see our transit master plan, they want to see our parking study. Not that they're necessarily, that we follow them to a T, some of them are very, and growth management strategy.
Through you, Chair, they can completely be. When we first did phase 1, they asked for specific reports that related to the study, and so that's what they're jumping off from. But certainly through feedback from the task force, and also when we reconvene the technical advisory committee, you're right, parking study, some of the work that was done through the downtown revitalization work, like some of those other back studies and backstories would be great to share.
Councillor Richardson.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. And that's exactly where I was going with that too. So thank you, Councillor Smeaton. The one common factor on all those 3 site visits was transit, connection to transit. And I don't see that in this model. So I do want to flag that, because that came up at every location.
Tim?
I have no idea who can answer this question, but can we mandate within development planning applications a site for this within the new developments that are going on in every community in this in the city currently? I know that schools can.
We'll let Councillor Smeaton give that one a go.
The short answer is no. The school policy is a 2% mandate within any development, so a school is mandated by the province within the framework of a development. And then there's a 2-year window for that, and there's a whole process I could explain sometime if you ever, but so that's why schools are guaranteed to be, at the very least, mapped out within a development. As are parks. Parks can also be cash in lieu, different situation. For example, if you have a park across the street, it may be negotiated through the planning department that there's a cash in lieu situation. The park would be redundant that sort of thing. As far as a cultural center would go, the planning department would probably advise that there are certainly developers, like people who, many of the developers, often when they speak through the planning department, remind council, remind the planning department, is there anything we could ever be doing? We want to be good community partners. Those conversations do take place. The integrity commissioner, of course, would want it to be, publicly announced that councillors don't engage in those conversations, but we certainly help facilitate through departments where there may be needs. So if I know, for example, that the community, a community care is about to enter into a fundraising campaign, then we certainly let our departments know that that's what I consider to be a need in Ward 5 and so on and so forth. So developers could certainly be made aware that this cultural center task force exists. And that's probably a good idea. They would probably, as community partners, would really enjoy knowing that that's something that they may activate on their end, how they might be able to participate if they chose. So it is not mandated through the site planning process that would be the case. I think that's what you were actually asking. So indirectly, though, a planner may have interests that we're not aware of, and probably a good idea that in conversations they're aware of this task force and that it's a need. Certainly. I would see that. I saw that more in the fundraising piece at the end. We're getting into that whole, but you're actually asking, the point blank question, could it be imposed as a mandate within a planning document? And no. That I'm aware of. I've never.
But possibly ending up in a new development if there were this sort of alignment with a developer is within the realm of possibility? No.
I'm not aware. That's a good question for the CAO. That's a good example of where Ron mentioned I'm available for questions. He'd be the perfect person to answer that question because he's got his paws on every municipality in Ontario. I would ask the CAO for that one. And he's here. Because I'd want to know the right answer to that. I think I've answered correctly, but that's his. That would be where he would, and I'm happy to go get him. I mean, I don't think Ron would have a problem at all. Yeah, might be.
Pat?
On that similar subject, I'm involved with our Optimist Club. We run soccer programs, and we have recently entered into discussions with some of the developers that they consider soccer fields in their park developments. It would be done in conjunction with Parks and Recreation in the master plan for the city. But it comes back to my mind one further question for Ron, and that if someone was to donate a piece of property to the city, how does that transpire? I'm not understanding whether the city's required to take a donation of a piece of property, but if one of our developers decided to supply a piece of property, we kind of jump ahead in the process because we're looking at a specific site, which currently we're not looking at specific sites. We're looking at everything is abstract at this point.
If I may, just to add to what Pat just said, the site itself has to be chosen specifically for its use for what we're doing, though. So it's a matter of the cart before the horse if you do it that way, I think. I don't know, that's just my thinking. But I certainly, looking at what you've just gone through with us, I really like the process of reaching out to all those potential community partners and neighbors and going through that whole process, because I mean, you never know what's out there until you open the door and ask people, and there's potential for all sorts of things. So are there any other questions related to the site selection for them? No? Then I guess we can move on.
Great. That is the end of our presentation then. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing your thoughts. And of course, if you have thoughts after this, please feel free to send them, share ideas, I think probably through Donna. But yeah, we're happy to receive your feedback. And I believe our next steps now, based on those discussions, is that we will move ahead with doing the actual work related to the research plan and going through the site selection process. And then we will come back to you in the new year with probably an update of where we're at and next steps. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. It's great having you here. And people around the table, can I have somebody put forward a motion to receive that presentation? Councillor Richardson, and second by Lori. And all in favor? And that's carried. Thank you very much.
Chair,
Yes, ma'am.
Rebecca Mustard had a no.
Okay. So where's that? That brings us to 7.3 on the agenda, City of Kawartha Lake strategic planning process, and I'm going to pass that over to Donna Goodwin. Thank you. And I'm just being mindful of time, folks. We have to keep an eye on the clock, I think. Some good discussion today, though, some good ideas.
So, Chair, I did check with the clerk's office, and there's no set end time for the meeting. So, as long as we chat through, if we're going to do an extension to finish the meeting, we're fine to do so.
Just want to, are we around the table? Because people do have commitments and outside of here. 3:30. Okay. Well, I think we'll do our very best to stick to the 3 o'clock. If we end up at 3:05 or something, we'll say.
So you guys can hear me, correct, with this? Okay. So one of the requests from our Office of Strategic Planning was for the task force to do just a little bit, doesn't have to be long or really extensive in the sense of for time's sakes, but a bit of feedback loop for our incoming strategic plan. So what was put in the agenda and attached was our current, and then the memo kind of explained sort of what we're trying to achieve here. So for today, really what we just want to go through sort of what we've been doing well, and then also to extend it into the 2024-2027 strategic plan, what we can do better, or if there's something that wasn't in our strategic plan now that should be moving forward, or if something that you noticed within the 4 pillars, if you think things should change in that way, then this is the forum to get that in. At least one of our comments should be culture related. If all 3, by the time we get to it, that's what we're trying to do, is get to 3 strategic priorities to provide. If all 3 are culture, fantastic, but we would hope at least one is. So we've handed sticky notes around. If people wanted to spend however long to write down their top 5 or their top whatever, then we'll try to massage it down to our 3, if that sounds good. People online, if you can write it in the chat, that would be great. Yes, task force members, of course.
Can I just perhaps add a little bit more information to that? So as a counselor, we often sit around and come up with different components that we want to see with our strategic planning, especially as we're moving and changing all the time. So this here is just an opportunity for us to, dial down and push out some of those priorities when it comes to this specific project. So that's what I think we're being asked to do today. Excuse me, through you, Chair. Donna, do you want to give us an example? So everybody's we're reading through the city's strategic plan right now for the new folks. Maybe just give an example of what you're looking for.
Sure. So one of the examples could be introduction of the Healthy Environment Plan. So we have a focus on the environment, and then we created a plan during this last strategic planning timeframe, and then of course that plan actually creates the policy. So then staff can be directed by council then to start working on the various sectors of the plan for servicing, for budgeting, so it's a bit of a tree model. So council makes those decisions. They set the priority based on feedback that they've gotten from the various departments. But then once it's done, so the 4 pillars are good government, quality of life, right? So those 4 pillars, and then from there, we each get our priorities. Am I missing the mark?
No. Well, I think it's to give an example of what this particular task force, sitting around the table with our expertise, an example of what you want to see from us.
Well, one of the key indicators in the last one is implementing of the cultural master plan. So you can be as specific as you want. Like that is right in there. So if you guys wanted to say build a cultural center, that's when you can be that specific. So because that was priority 4. I don't want to quote me on that, but of the cultural master plan. So what happened was the cultural master plan was done, but then within it, someone pulled out that specific thing of implementing that cultural master plan out of all the other plans. So we can be just as specific, or we can be general. We could be talking about expanding our transit ride, right? We could be talking about expanding our wastewater treatment. We could be talking about adding more bike trails. Like those are just sort of the general, the 4 pillars are your general pockets or buckets. And then within those, you can have specific targets. So, and I certainly don't want to lead the group, but if we are only focusing on this cultural center, then you would be talking about increased spending for cultural activities. You'd be talking about capital improvements to allow for a cultural, like a cultural facility, like very specific targets.
Like something like that.
Got it.
Exactly. Multi-use facility. Increase inclusivity and accessibility.
Right? Those are those things.
So we're using this collective group as an opportunity to contribute to the ultimate strategic master plan.
Exactly.
Got it.
But it's a very, very, on point. We're not being charged with trying to figure out how to expand the Trans-Canada Trail.
Yep.
Someone else might be looking after that. So if you want more partnerships and services for culture, that would be something. And then that would be everything from implementing it through Parks and Rec, through economic development, through archival, through building and property. That's how they roll.
So we're looking for targets.
Yeah.
To include in the strategic master plan, what we're doing.
I think they've already jumped it.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. This is like writing your Santa list. See?
Thank you, Santa.
That's right.
You want 3 though?
Okay, we got 2 more here. Build a cultural center fast.
Just so Pat's not hung out. He's always being hung out as the guy. He needs a speed partner.
And be sure that the transit master plan considers this project.
Right, so we're currently going through the transit master plan, so that's something for them for realization today.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So we got, now Rebecca's done it this way, 2 actions and an objective. So she has public art installations, public murals and sculptures. Another action could be creating artists in residence. Another objective would be create vibrant public spaces.
Yep.
Oh, those were online.
Here's also.
Okay, collaboration is critical. So Tim. Service culture equally to recreation. Keep fostering partnerships in community. Yeah. Facilitate different genres of art and artisans. Love it. And it's okay to have multiple. Like if one of your top 3 is also build the cultural center fast, then it's okay to have that 2 or 3 times on the board. Like it's.
No pressure, 3 minutes.
Help our existing cultural assets to collaborate, target for meeting cultural expectations of our growing residents, and create a cultural activity environment. Realize that kids are extremely involved. GTA families are moving in.
I just put connect cultural partners purposefully.
Okay, connect cultural partners purposefully.
"60 seconds, people." Tick, tick,
Add
tick.
not-for-profit lens to vibrant and growing economy. Create a community that is dynamic and inclusive for arts, activation and appreciation, and contribute to the cultural vibrancy of the community. So, all right, perfect. Build it, they will come. Okay. So
I feel there's some commonalities amongst these things. So probably Donna won't have much difficulty facilitating a meltdown of our priorities. You know what? While the grouping is going on, can we just throw out some interesting observations from last week, and we can sort of manage that, because I don't think we're going to have a lot of time to actually do that. And just casually, people's thoughts. Lori, go for it.
Oakville probably is the closest example. It wasn't quite an artscape, which I hope the consultants will consider looking at. But they had favorable conditions, high capacity, a guild that folded. What I noticed is they also had a tax levy. They made a conscious decision that there was no corporate sponsorship to name the building. But they looked for sponsors of programs or rooms. So I thought that was very interesting. They also had 4 tiers of membership. I hope our consultants got to that depth. They may have seen that facility before, but some of this information kind of came on the side as I was asking questions. The Gibson House, to me, was probably not an example of what we're looking for, and a great example of what happens when you're constantly looking to finance your operation. That was a building and a wedding venue benefiting one artist and the rest of them in the attic, albeit beautiful. And I just wanted to recognize that unless you're a line item, you're going back year after year, and I recognize that that's what the Gibson House sort of exemplified. And then the last one, the archive, very different than everything else. A very expensive build, and I really hope the consultants are thinking about a double wall and different temperatures and 5 boilers, etc. That's it. Thank you.
One of the things that stuck out to me the most of the whole day was that you could access the space in Oakville as an individual. You know, you had to jump through the hoops. You had to either prove your worth or take your courses, but you could go. It was not a place that required oversight or staffing or these types of things. It was actually, to me, more of a center for community than a community center. And I think that was one of the biggest takeaways for me from the whole time was that. And the second was the same as yours. The second venue in Alliston was great. It was lovely, but they were a wedding venue because they had to be. And that's really unfortunate that, you know, if let's hold ourselves to a higher, to a higher bar, that, we don't have to be a wedding venue because that's the only thing that pays the bills.
Christina.
Thanks. Just wanted to echo what was said so far. While I mentioned that the Oakville one felt big, that it didn't necessarily, like, could be more things going on. There still was a lot going on in that space versus the one in Alliston, which felt very empty. Again, it's a midweek thing, and I know they did have, the one artist group in there, but it really did feel like an empty space. And just echoing the comments too about the amount of effort and time that gets spent on just trying to keep the doors open is definitely a concern felt by all arts organizations. And so I like the model with the levy personally, but that's just something that's kind of weighing on me as we go through this. And that question that I asked earlier of the consultants in terms of like the pros and cons with the governance structure, just because just the amount of time and effort I know from my own personal job that gets spent on that fundraising is a big concern for me.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll just, I guess, touch on the observations that I came home with, and I also very much liked the Oakville model. I do agree that a bit institutional, and that, I mean, it was a high school, and it's now a cultural center. The things I did like that I saw there were a room full of children doing clay modeling, and studios that had glass open to hallways where you could observe the activities going on. I was very happy to hear that the wood shop, the pottery shop, those types of activity-based spaces were very heavily used and financially viable to operate. Because it would go contrary to what you'd think, that you put a whole bunch of expensive equipment into a space that it would maybe be difficult to make it financially viable. So I was very happy to hear that those spaces were so heavily used. And but the archive conversation has come into this mix kind of through the back door. And being involved with the initial stages before the feasibility study, there was no specific investigation of a municipal archive in the original study. It was added in kind of last minute because there is a municipal need. I see that municipal need as separate from our cultural center need. Municipalities are required to have an archive to preserve their paperwork and so on. If it can be married to benefit the cultural center, then I would say that's great. But if the archive becomes the focus and is draining finances from the operation of the cultural center, then I would say we need to look at a model of having an archive and a cultural activity-based center. There's not any activity going on in that archive space that we saw. There's a few employees, they're locked in that building all day by themselves. Very few people are coming in, very tiny reception area. So I would sooner focus on the activity-based center.
Thank you. And we're going to pause right there for the moment, unless somebody has something really exciting they want to say about last week. And Pat, you can turn your microphone off there. Okay. I'm just, it's 3:04 now, and I do want to take care of this. And I think we're going to bring up these things constantly as we move forward. So what I'm wondering, just before we go to wrap this up, is there a forum that we could somehow like submit to you things that we notice that we'd like to share? No, I'm thinking that we would all understand that it would come out with our agenda and be a public document, but just because if we don't get a chance to share it right now here, if we want the opportunity to share some observations, maybe that would be a way, and it could be included in our package. Is that a possibility, Donna?
Yes, I think I think we can. What I was, the reason I haven't been taking notes is because, of course, this is being live streamed and it's being recorded and it'll be posted. And what I was going to do is I was going to take all of the comments, I was going to sort of synthesize them. I was going to provide any context, say for comments that like you said, like some of them were when you just had a conversation. The consultants are also going to be watching this. That's why they haven't stayed, so they can hear the feedback, because it's, you know, their line items, you know, they're however much they're being paid per hour. It made more sense for them to go back and hear the conversation recorded. And then I was also going to suggest that if people, like I took a lot of photos of certain things, other people took photos of others. And so I was going to suggest that if those be sent to us, then I could do a little bit of a report, and then it could be added to the next agenda, or it could be, you know, it can be circulated in advance, or it can be whatever. Like I'll check with clerks on the actual process of that. But for sure, it'd be much better to have it in one, like all the photos, all of the comments in one. And I also, the other thing too that I was curious about, just from the recorder secretary, is do people want feedback on their comments? Like when Pat, when you were talking about the archive. So one of the reasons why the archive was included in the tour is because from the beginning, there's been the discussion of shared curatorial space. And I'm curious about like those lines of discussions, because the archive is different than our record center. And the archive is more along the lines of that curatorial space. So that's why it was included. So I don't know if people want some of that background information as well, because the record center, that's reams and reams of paper, and that's a corporate thing, and but the archive is everything from maps and photography and artwork, and it's 2D artifact and then 3D artifact, and that was that whole shared services space that we were working with our other partners on. So it was part of the original. And so I just want to make sure that, because all this information of course goes to the consultant, and we want to make sure that that lineage does sort of come out in our review as well. So but that's up to you guys.
No, I think that's important. Just you actually taking the moment there just to explain that whole process and why we have to marry up and, you know, move with this collaboration type of model is because at the end of the day, we want to be as sustainable and feasible as we possibly can, but covering all those bases that our communities need. And, you know, just for me, you know, last weekend looking in, of course, me being a counselor, I'm always about how do we make money here, right? So for me, the top ones that really stood out were, you know, that rehearsal hall space, right? It was booked every single day. The gallery, I couldn't believe how many folks were coming just to view the different displays in gallery. And that just shows you how important and critical that component is. Our archives about proper preservation is so critical, you know, for our heritage. So there's so many different facets that we have to look at, and I think those are critical things that we have to keep in mind. And, you know, moving forward, the group needs to recognize that too, because we are unique. We are a community of communities, and we want to provide a model that's, you know, going to fit as many folks as possible. And I think I really want to push that out there as well. But we also need to be sustainable and feasible moving forward. So we do have to have that collaboration.
So Donna, are you okay? Oh, yeah.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a small point of clarification again. I think something that's getting missed here too in the discussion between the Records Center and Archives. The Archives is actually tied to the Records Center, and the Records Center that we're currently in, I believe last year we were told has about a 10 to 20 year lifespan left in it. So those are things that are in parts of the considerations. And just also, there are ways for archives to generate revenue as well.
Thank you. And so Donna, if you're going to do that and make a little report that can be shared publicly, that would be great. I will send you some, because I have a good 10, 15 minutes worth of comments that we probably don't want to listen to right now. But I'd be happy to send them to you and some pictures too. Okay. All right. Well, back to what we were doing.
Okay. To summarize, and you can all agree or disagree with this collection, there are certain thematic areas. So one that comes out is the development of a cultural centre facility. It's talked about building the centre, building it fast, having different genres in there, multi-use, inclusive. So a piece around like an actual facility, which you're working on here. There's another stream of thought around the funding of culture, funding it equally to recreation, ongoing financial support for the sector. So a funding question, a funding thematic area. Another one on economic development, so culture, not-for-profit seen as economic development, so a way to view the industry. Another area around vibrant, activated public spaces. So we're talking public art, public space, the environment which we create. Another thematic area around audience, knowing your people, building things for the community that's here and the community that's coming. It's quite a forethought there. And building in a way that people can appreciate and contribute to the cultural community as they come. And another thematic area around collaboration. So you've talked a lot around existing assets, helping them to collaborate, fostering collaboration, purposefully building partners within and again, specific to culture. And then a specific area as well, the last one here is around programming, and a lot of you spoke about artists, so deliberate programming, whether it's residencies, the Arts and Heritage Trail, education, space for artist classes, so that which may or may not fit in a cultural centre facility might be broader than that. Does that sound? Transit, thank you. Transit I had put into the cultural centre facility because it seemed to be a comment specific to the development of the facility. Is that okay? Oh, sure. Okay. Okay, so your goal, I'll just read those themes out again. The goal of this is to be able to say to council, they'll get into the strategic planning process, we'll go all of these ideas. But if you had to boil 3 of these concepts to the top, and it is a strategic plan, so we are like big picture, 30,000 feet in how we describe things here, is there 3 that you can come in consensus for? So again, a cultural centre facility, culture is economic development, reliable funding for culture, building culture for the community that's coming, here and coming, vibrant, activated public spaces, fostering collaboration, and providing programming. So there's 8 different areas. 3. You get 3.
My first one is all 8. Okay. Now, building culture for, they're all awesome, but I think in the top 3, building culture for those who are here and who are coming, however you worded that, and those that are coming. So in the strategic plan, making sure that culture is a huge focus as we build the city is what I heard you read. So that would be for me a big one.
I like your words. Yeah. You can choose 3. It'd be helpful if you chose 3, and I'll just tally them if that works. We're super unofficial, officially.
Well, what he said.
Yeah.
Because there's no way I could actually restate that. Just a word of support for recognizing nonprofit as part of the contributor to economic development. I think that there's a long-term opportunity there. In that I hope that the cultural center is seen as a viable contributor to the development of the city. And that's maybe overlapping with the first one, but that's why I separated that as a point, okay? So that would be my number 2.
Yeah, you're up.
Well, we talk about activity in our strategic plan, being healthy activity, being active, being, we have walking trails, running trails. It'd be great to have more bike trails and footpaths through town, but I think that it's important to look at the cultural center as activity-based. And it goes hand in hand with programming, with youth programming, with seniors programming. During the day, during the night, the middle of the night, it should be a facility that gets maximum use. And I kind of see it as a beehive. You got the worker bees coming and going all the time. And that will create a successful environment. Bodies coming in and out, constantly doing things that are culturally based.
Okay. Thanks, Pat. Tim, you're up.
I think that fundamentally, as part of a strategic plan, the city understanding that investment in culture has a direct return, because I believe that it has an economic return. And I think that that's actually something as a group or as a city or as an organization that we should be making sure that we can quantify appropriately. But the addition to quality of life is, I believe that these things are measurable, can be spoken in city language. And I think that the cultural sector needs to be understood as a sector for its benefits and for the outcomes and the outputs that it brings to the city. So any level of focus is good, but the deeper and better understood that focus is, the better. And yes, a lovely art center that really importantly is not a palace of the arts, right? This needs to be something that you don't, go through the doors of and have to pay. This needs to be something that the barriers to entry are not high, that it's not all sealed off behind walls of what's going on. This needs to be open and for the community.
Christina?
I think Tim said it well, and what was rolling around in my head in terms of that economic, tourism, and the arts, and bringing those together. I don't think I have anything else more to add, though. I've appreciated what everyone else has said.
Thank you. Lisa?
I don't have much to add either. I agree with everything that's been said. Just making sure everything's affordable for the groups that are going to be using the space and the public that's accessing it.
Tracy. Councillor Richardson, did you?
I'm good with what's being said. I mean, this is the reason why we have the group sitting around this table right now. They're representing the community, and I feel like they've really dived down here and gave us a lot of good thoughts. So I'm in support.
Okay.
I think I love what these folks have already said. I love the part building something culturally for the people who are here and the people who are coming, because we are in a very growing community, and it's great, So that, and I love what Tim was just saying as well. Things have to be accessible. It's got to be a place where people go, not just drive by and go, oh, that's the arts place. It's got to pull people in. So.
And that school curriculum program was so key in Oakville, and I think that's, we don't want to lose focus of that either, right? Because we're inspiring the younger generation as well.
My comments there were for the partnerships and reaching out to community partners.
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
So if I was to just summarize what I'm hearing, and we'll play back this and capture a little bit better, but it might actually be that there are two major themes that are rising that you want to get into the in front of council so they get your opinion here. One is around at high level, the importance that culture is a focus for the municipality, that it is tied to economic development, that it is funded properly, that effort is put into culture. The second one being this facility that we're working on, so a cultural centre, and all the other pieces that tie into it. So programming it, building it for the people, the collaboration that needs to go into the space, the activation of the space, what the space is, how it's built, sort of all feeds in together. So they're the two priorities really come to the top of what you're talking about. Is that a fair? Yes, lots of nods. Okay. Lisa and Christine, is that okay? Okay. Thank you so much.
And at this point, folks, we're looking for a motion to adjourn. Tim, Lori, all those in favor? There we go. Thank you very much. That was a lot of good discussion, and thanks for giving us your extra time there, folks, too. That was great. Good.